I'm Stephen Mattingly. As I introduced myself earlier, I'm going to be presenting on looking at different performance measures for transit and how we can go about trying to gather what those performance measures should look like. This presentation is part of some ongoing research that we're doing that's trying to reimagine some of these performance measures that transit companies are using to fit what the community needs. So we're really trying to get a good handle on what the current typical public transit performance measures are. That's what the first part of this presentation is going to be about, looking at what's out there and where the emphasis is for the different agencies. But we've hypothesized that by and large, they don't emphasize issues that are important to environmental justice populations, that they don't emphasize access to employment, they don't emphasize access to health care and to the other opportunities that might include recreational activities, green space, food, family, etc. Instead, we hypothesized that the emphasis is more on management, efficiency, and ultimately attracting choice riders, because that's really what a lot of our field is about, is been how do we get people out of their cars into public transit and reduce congestion. That's a big part of our career. That's what we've been really focused on for the past 30 plus years. And so we're going to be trying to use some community-based participatory research to arrive at these performance measures, to really get into the community and see what's important to them and measure what's important to them. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that our performance measures are measurable, of course, understandable for non-transportation experts. We want anyone, especially politicians, to be able to understand the performance measures. We'd like for them to be related to actual system operations in some form or fashion. Definitely statistics, because I'm still an engineer. And consistent with other system measures, and ideally be able to help make cost-effective strategies for data collection. So from the agency's perspective, they're looking for performance measures to help riders and stakeholders recognize the performance aims of the system. So what they're wanting these is performance measures that communicate to the public and say, these are the things that matter to us. They want accurate data collection that's more than just ridership, because just looking at ridership alone is really not going to be sufficient for analyzing the effectiveness of a transit agency. They want to make sure that any modifications in the system can use these performance measures to justify or explain why these changes are important. And then they also want to use, probably most importantly for them, protect the transit provider's interest from the personal requests for changes in the system that are not reasonable. So just trying to cover themselves with, this is not going to be a reasonable change for us because it's only going to help you. That seems like a pretty reasonable goal for an agency to have. So from a broad perspective, we can think about goals and what the agencies are really trying to focus on. And here we're looking at increasing ridership, and this is an example from Memphis. Increasing ridership while maintaining service efficiency. And so here we're looking at this needing a ridership performance measure and probably an efficiency performance measure to be able to adequately explain how well they're achieving this goal. Operate reliable transportation services. So here we're seeing that they need some kind of quality measure in addition to reliability. Sustain customer-focused service environment. This is some kind of customer focus performance measure needs to be there for that. And then ensure a safe and clean environment for both customers and employees. And we've put those together in safety and security. So when we look at the our literature review and what we've accomplished thus far, we've looked at a variety of different transit agencies, but most importantly, we've gathered together our performance measures that we've seen across these agencies in these 7 categories. And these are categories that were identified by the agencies themselves, but we've also been working on ones that were not attached to a particular broad category on assigning those into these spots. If we look just very briefly here, we'll notice that cost effectiveness, efficiency, environmental, reliability. We've got a lot of pieces here that are going to be tied to the operation of the system. A lot of performance measures that are going to be clumped into that area. And really, ultimately, not a whole lot looking at people and the communities that we're serving. So in a broad sense, when we looked across all the agencies, we see that the most heavily utilized performance measures, cost effectiveness, efficiency, and operational performance measures. That's what we see most transit agencies relying on. We also see very little emphasis on environmental. Reliability, not a whole lot on customer focus. So we're seeing that there is potentially this gap that exists between the focus of the transit agency, which is really about how well are we operating, how much our money are we able to save and still deliver the services that we're delivering. Okay, so within these 5 categories, what we've done is we've picked out the performance measures that showed up most often in these particular categories. And we'll see that for operation, we get some consistency here where we've got passenger miles per trip or vehicle miles where we're trying to look at service coverage. If we're looking at service in terms of time, we can be looking at travel time. We might also even have hours of service. But all of these are very infrequently utilized if we're looking across all the transit agencies. So there's really a lack of consistency and a lack of consensus that's out there as far as which performance measures are most important for agencies to be using. Also, in light of our particular focus, I want to highlight the customer-focused community. Complaints is the measure, and only 14% of the agencies are utilizing that. That seems not like it's very focused on what the community needs, and more on, please don't yell at us. It certainly seems to me to be a potential gap for further consideration. So, highlighted these a little bit already. Service area performance measures definitely could be improved. There's really nothing that's focused on the service area and how well we're serving communities. Lack of consensus. We've got primarily on operations, cost effectiveness and efficiency, just like we expected. And then we need to be able to measure accessibility, connectivity, really do a better job of trying to understand service quality too. So we're going to be utilizing a community advisory board to help us in this process of coming up with what performance measures would be most effective for captive riders, for the environmental justice population, for trying to refocus away from just worrying about choice riders to who are the people we really have to serve well if we want them to be able to have a meaningful change in their lives. And so what we've done is we've gathered together a variety of transportation experts, partners, other stakeholders. Right now we're focused primarily in the DFW area, but this is to try to help us get an idea of how to be connecting with the community, and then also what are the most important factors for us to be considering, both from a transit agency perspective, because we've got transit agencies included in this community advisory board too, but also from a community perspective. So they're going to help oversee our data collection effort, and I'll talk about the data collection effort in just a second. They're going to also be able to review the findings that we generate from the data collection effort, and then help us, and they're going to be helping us with creating the data collection when we're talking about the focus groups and these interviews and surveys that we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing 3 focus groups. We're going to be doing additional interviews and surveys associated with that to try to get into the captive riders that are using the system, how well they're able to interact, and what they view as being the most important ways to assess their transit service. Not how I would assess it. How would they want the transit service to be assessed? Really trying to focus a lot on this first mile, last mile connectivity. One of the reasons that we want to focus a lot on the first mile, last mile connectivity is this is where we see the future of these emerging opportunities in the transit field. If we're looking at bike share, which we just had, this is a first mile, last mile issue. And that's where we can be trying to improve service by implementing something small. And now we've made the overall transit system more effective and providing better service coverage to everyone. We could be looking at partnerships with Uber or Lyft or something like, or a transit agency's own last mile kind of connectivity service. These are all things that need to be evaluated in light of trying to serve these captive populations. Choice riders, they're important. We want to get people out of their cars, but ultimately, if people can't get to work, they can't stay employed. And they're going to be transit captive for the rest of their lives. So here's some example focus group questions that we're looking at. And so here, focusing on transportation disadvantage, some barriers to fair access to transportation. What do you believe is important to close the gap in equitable transportation? Just general kind of trying to probe for interesting ideas that we can then pull from what matters and try to come up with ways to measure that. And then some discussion about the way that they use public transportation, whether they use it or not, why not, and some of the other issues that would impact, most specifically, their willingness to use public transit. So our goal will be to develop these future performance measures, that focus on the system's economic viability and sustainability. We certainly don't want something that can't survive based on the current subsidies that are provided to the public transit system. But we also want to be thinking about equity, access, and health. We want all those to be other performance measures that we're thinking about when we evaluate the transit system. We're looking for reliable, available. The complexity of interpretation should be, not complex to interpret. Should be simple to interpret. And then, obviously, low cost for data collection. So our plan is to then take the performance measures that we generate and apply them to evaluate first and last mile alternatives and look at how well they perform versus the competing first and last mile alternatives in achieving these different performance measures. We'll wrap up an evaluation of these candidate performance measures based on how well they work in these case studies when we're comparing environmental justice communities versus non-environmental justice communities, and then review those findings with the Community Advisory Board. I will entertain questions. Well, so they are very general. And the whole idea is to get a general sense of what matters to the community. What do they value? And then it's up to us as the technical experts to try to come up with ways to actually measure what matters to those audiences.